Hi, and welcome to another episode of Danny Brown Talks Phoenix. I am your host, Danny Brown, and today I am joined by Mel Bosna. She is a photographer, an advocate, artist, storyteller, and a clinician. Thanks for joining us, Mel. Appreciate having you.
I'm excited to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we can kind of dive into each one of those things and what you're doing here in Phoenix.
Sure. So I am a Phoenician. I was born here. I'm second generation native. And so I definitely feel like a child, adult of the desert. I went to school here, grew up here. I've tried to leave, but it's home.
It always pulls you back in.
Yes, it does. It does. And I went to ASU for both my degrees, and my undergraduate degree was in sociology.
Okay.
And I just really loved studying how people dwell together, how they live together, the communities that they create. And that led me to get a master's in social work.
So what is not to interrupt,
Yeah.
but what is sociology?
Sure.
And is that different than like psychology?
Yes. So psychology really is the study of an individual. So think of the brain, an individual's emotional map, an individual's experiences and life story. Sociology is the study of society.
Okay.
So it's looking at people groups, systems, institutions, and then like family groups.
So it's like
it's
macro
culture.
versus micro.
Yes, exactly. And both really interested me, which is why when I was pursuing a graduate degree, I went ahead and did social work as my focus. So I got a master's in social work because I wanted to really improve the way, or at least contribute to improving the way humans live together.
Gotcha.
Like how they dwell together. And I had a passion for doing clinical work at the time as well with individuals and families, but I just couldn't ignore or see the individual outside of the context of our culture, society, the institutions in which they live within. And so that's what kind of put me in that direction. So when I graduated from grad school, I ended up working at a couple of different clinical settings. So I was at an inpatient eating disorder facility. It was an intensive unit for 4 years.
Wow.
And specialized in body image therapy, sexuality, trauma. And from there, was the director for a group home for girls who'd been sex trafficked. And in the kind of the span of those two facilities, I realized I just needed an outlet, a hobby, if you will. The work was really intense.
Sure.
I loved it. People's stories have always mattered to me. Their healing. But I was like, I just need to be doing something creative. And so I picked up a camera. And I'd always been interested in photography, but had not, I'd never taken a class before.
Sure.
Or anything like that. But so I picked up a camera and just started going through my manual and literally just self-taught, read it front to back, just really learning how to use it, control it, and started creating. And I had no professional ambitions with that. However, it just kind of evolved into this photography business. So I did it on the side for a number of years while I was still at those facilities, and largely just photographing families, children's newborns, really happy milestones and life events.
Almost the complete opposite
Yes.
of what you were doing in your day-to-day life, because I imagine that in your day-to-day life, working as a social worker,
Yeah.
that it's super intense, probably very sad at times, I would imagine. And so the photography was probably more bright, happier times for people, so kind of polar opposites.
Yes, there was purpose to both, and I really needed both
Sure.
at that time. So yes, the social work was much more joining in the suffering of others, and photography was kind of joining in the celebrating.
Yeah, I
that
imagine
time.
if you're, in the social work atmosphere like you were full-time all the time, that it makes you start to question humanity. And
I've heard some sad things.
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
for sure.
I'm sure.
So that started Lululu Photography. That's the name of that business. And I've done that for over a decade.
Wow.
I still do it. After working at the facility for the group home for the girls who've been leaving sex trafficking, I got pregnant and decided I didn't want to work, a 70-hour work week anymore. And
Weird.
Yeah, I know. I'm so abnormal. And so that's when I started private practice for my clinical work. And I'm still in that private practice today. So I feel really grateful. I see mostly adult women who are survivors, again, of trafficking, sexual assault, domestic violence, and then just women who are wanting to also improve their relationship with whether it's humanity or themselves, their family of origin, all of that stuff.
So is that more of a switch then from the sociology side of things to more of a psychology side of things? Because now you're helping, it sounds like you're focusing more on the individual than a group setting.
Yes, I would say that I am definitely more focused on the individual now. However, the lens, if you will, to combine metaphors that I look at my individual clients with is still through kind of that broader systems perspective. So even when I have an individual in my office, I'm still considering the intersection, if you will, of how our society and culture and all these institutions are influencing her individual experience.
Okay.
So for instance, if I have an individual client in my office and she's processing her pain, I'm considering how class, poverty, race, sexuality, all of that is intersecting. So that's the broad lens that I'm looking at to see how it's also influencing her very specific experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like it's only recently that these things have started to come out into the open and have become more accepted to talk about.
Yes, I do believe that we're destigmatizing mental health issues and a lot of, just a lot of the suffering that
Which
people are experiencing.
Needs to happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So your career has kind of evolved and you're setting and doing this kind of a passion project now.
Yes.
Telling these stories through photography, on Instagram.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure.
And I'm imagining that being in the social work and seeing these women and their stories, it kind of led to where you're at now.
Yes, very much so. So like I said, I had this business, Lululu Photography, that was very family happy, baby oriented. A few years ago, though, I started to just kind of crave wanting to create a different type of art. And in my clinical social work definitely informed that perspective, wanting to validate and honor the stories of women. And I will say that this really kind of came to a head maybe in 2016, 2017. And so
Sure.
If we just all kind of reflect on what was happening culturally at the time in America, we were just seeing and have continued to see, right, a lot of polarization,
Sure.
Specifically within our political conversations. And I had grown up in a fairly conservative, evangelical, white community. And one of the things I started to observe was just how much fear people were verbalizing about what seemed different to them. So whether that was related to refugee issues, immigrants, people of color, the LGBTQ community, within this specific community I came from, I just got a sense that there was so much fear, and it seemed to be one of the larger things influencing that division that I was feeling. And so I thought, what helps us truly love our neighbor, right? And for me, that's knowing our neighbor. You can't really love somebody, extend grace or acceptance to somebody you're not willing to know. And yet our fear prevents us so much of the time from knowing someone. So I at the time I had the thought, I wonder if I could start amplifying voices, just the real lived experiences of women that perhaps people from the community I grew up in might otherwise not be privy to.
Sure.
So the storytelling project emerged from there. And so I have the honor of getting to photograph women, and they write. I send them a questionnaire, kind of with some prompts of here's some journaling questions for reflection, and they answer. They answer it, and I use just their words and then the images I take of them, and I put it together in a blog post, and then snippets of that get shared on Instagram.
Well, it's super impactful. I think, to touch on some of the things that you mentioned is that I think fear is natural. People fear change. People fear anything that's different. I think human beings are generally good, and you can very easily pigeonhole a community and label a certain community as bad. But when you break out the individuals that make up that community, it's a lot harder to do that. And I can kind of see that in the stories that you're sharing is it's about the individual and not necessarily the group. So it makes it super impactful.
Yes. Yeah. Brene Brown, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's one of our country's kind of experts on shame and courage right now. And she talks about the importance of when we are scared, again, to just kind of lean in. So that natural tendency is always to pull back and withdraw, to retreat. But when we have the opportunity to interact with people, again, who are different from us for any number of reasons, right? But instead of that initial withdrawal, that we have the opportunity to lean in and get closer, and yeah, that's when connection.
Well, it takes courage to be able to lean in and do that.
Yeah, there's a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you go about finding people to feature in this project that you're doing, and what are some of the ways that you get them to kind of open up? Because I imagine it's a really difficult. I mean, they're probably facing a lot of demons and things that happen to them that aren't pleasant. So how do you kind of work through that with them?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I would say that the majority of people who I have photographed for this project so far have either been somebody I've interacted with in some other context or have been referred to me by somebody else who also knows what I'm doing. And so there is some trust already established. Sure. I think having the kind of clinical skills that I already have definitely lend themselves to this work as well.
It seems like a natural fit.
Yes, it is. And it's not therapy that I'm providing as much as I just get to be a witness to their own expression.
But I have to imagine it is therapeutic for them to go through the questionnaire, because I'm imagining the questionnaire is basically them telling their story, and then you telling that story through the photographs. There has to be
a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that it's therapeutic for them to kind of work through that process.
Yes. I think that it sounds silly to say it, but it surprised me actually how much so, because the initial vision for me with this project was actually for whoever was viewing it, receiving it, to be changed. And I hadn't initially, I wasn't anticipating that the experience for the person sharing their story would be as profound as it has been. And for me as well, like to get to walk onto, it feels like holy ground.
Sure.
And I cry at pretty much every session behind my lens. And what has surprised me too is, they answer this questionnaire in advance, but oftentimes what comes out during the actual photo session is something very different than either one of us was anticipating, and sometimes not even meant to be shared. It's just simply an experience, a connection they're having.
Can you give us any sort of examples? Is that okay to share some of the stories? Or
Sure. I wouldn't share anything that happened like at a session that they didn't.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely not. I don't want you to betray anybody's trust.
But I will say, one particular story that was very moving for me is a dear friend of mine, Gail, who is a breast cancer survivor, and she lives in Charlotte. And she was out visiting, and we went out, just into the desert at sunset. It's my preferred time to shoot. And, because so much of her story involved her experience with surviving cancer, at one point we had her take her shirt off so that we could just look at the scars, and seeing just her beautiful body and these scars that were such a testament to what she had survived. In that sunlight, in that moment, I actually put my hand on her chest and could feel her heartbeat. And it just felt like this profound celebration of her life.
Wow.
That again, it's not that we hadn't discussed necessarily that
Sure,
prior to the session, but I knew and she knew it was just meant to be what happened.
Yeah.
And she shared those photos. You can see them on the blog.
That's the kind of stuff that you can't script.
No.
And is probably the most impactful.
Yes.
What has the response been to kind of what you're doing?
Oh, it's been very positive.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, for people, I think, who, again, are willing to lean in, so there's even some risk with just witnessing it, reading it. But people who are curious and can maintain that open posture to hear others' stories, it's been very positive. And so in some ways they're learning about differences. But I will say that, the common thing is that people just realize how much we have in common,
Absolutely.
right? How similar really we all are. So it's just been an affirmation of humanity.
And I'm sure there's not many people out there who can't. My mom's a survivor twice. So I'm sure that there's a large segment of the population who has a family member or wife or some sort of relative or friend who's a survivor. So I do think that there's probably more out there that we have in common than don't. And people tend to focus too much on the differences than what really brings us together as kind of humanity as a whole. Right.
And that goes back to fear.
Yeah, again, absolutely.
And systems of power.
That's very great. So are there any stories of people that you've taken where it's been a celebration, where it's been, or is it usually starting with something that's more tragic and then celebrating, the coming out of it? Right.
I will say it is largely been, this is just who I am. So it's a story more of identity and looking at these are things about me as a person that I wish other people knew and didn't assume. This is what makes me feel alive. This is how I identify or see myself, or this is how I'd like to see myself. And in there are parts that are painful and also, again, yes, very celebratory. So I just recently photographed a lovely woman who, after 2 decades of being single, surviving a domestic violence marriage, she's ready to start dating, and so those photos at that storytelling session, very much were a celebration of her kind of coming into a new season of just readiness and ripeness.
That's incredible.
Yeah, she's excited. So that was definitely full of joy.
Now, do you find yourself learning a lot about yourself when you're going through
that's a good question,
process?
Danny. Oh gosh, I have to think about that. I'm always learning about myself. Yeah, I think I'm always open in a session or in, both in my storytelling project as well as with my clients in my clinical practice. Yeah. It's obviously about them and the work that they're doing that I get to join them in. But I do often engage in that self-reflection of what was coming up for me during their story, during that session. So, whether I'm behind my camera or sitting in, a chair talking to somebody, I definitely engage in that reflective process of what did that bring up in me related to my own story that I'm perhaps healing or growing, evolving, all of that as well. So.
And do you only focus on women?
I have so far, but I'm completely open to shooting men and their stories for this project. It takes vulnerability to share, and I would say that
it's
women,
a little harder for men.
Women tend to be a little bit more willing to risk like engage in some risk taking.
Sure.
But yeah, if
Being vulnerable as a man is not as culturally accepted.
right, we're still working on destigmatizing that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, some other questions that I would have then is, do you take any of this into when photographing the families and the newborns when you're shooting? Is there a crossover?
There's not much of a crossover. I would say that my work in both spaces does tend to be emotive and about connection still. And so I may ask a prompting question during a family session, which would be similar to how I approach a storytelling session.
And you ask those questions too to get people to have some sort of reaction.
Yes.
And then you can, rather than just saying cheese.
Right. I'm not interested in just standard portraiture, which there's, again, purpose, time and a place for it, but
Sure.
It doesn't inspire me. And so, yes, prompting questions will stimulate some type of laughter or emotion. So with a couple, I may frequently ask them to just turn towards each other and share maybe something that they've enjoyed or appreciated about the other person, to the other person, not to me. Or I frequently will have a dad lean down and whisper into his wife's ear, something that I can't hear. And I tell them I don't want to hear it. And that usually invokes some laughter or blushing, But
Yeah, probably makes the photos a little bit more natural too, instead
definitely.
of posed. How do you go about finding the people that you want to feature and tell stories about on both sides of the spectrum, whether it's the families or through your storytelling project?
Well, storytelling, again, I would say that it's mostly emerged from the community I'm already part of or through word of mouth. And then with Lululu Photography, I've been doing it long enough that I just have some clients who are really invested in my business. I feel grateful for that. I don't go looking for anybody anymore. They
That's
find
nice.
me. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. I'm listed ranked well on Google. So because of that, again, people generally find me. So I'm able to just focus on the work then, the art I'm creating, as opposed to having to find clients. And I just know that's because I'm a more established business,
That's nice, being able to focus more on the art, because I imagine that it comes out better when you can spend that
It's
time.
more fun for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have a blog, and that's kind of where it starts, and then you upload some of the snippets of that story into Instagram. What's the blog if people want to reach out to you and follow it?
So the storytelling blog is just melbosna.com. So Mel and then BOSNA.com. And then the Instagram account is Mel Bosna Storyteller.
Well, like I said, I follow the Instagram, and the stories and the photos are really impactful. I think I saw one that you shared just recently. A woman had a tear, just a single tear in her eye, and the background was really gorgeous at sunset, and it looked like a really kind of intense moment between you and the person that you were featuring.
Yes, thank you, Danny. Again, it's an honor.
Yeah.
It's an honor to get to share that space with people.
And you said the photography business name a couple of times.
Yeah.
Would you mind spelling it?
That's one of those things in hindsight, you think back to your early 20-something self, and I'm like, it would have been nicer to just choose a business name that was easy to remember,
and spell.
Yeah.
Right?
So Lululu Photography, it's Lulliloo.
Okay, perfect.
But there's not a lot of similar business names. So if you even get half of those letters into Google, then it should pop up.
So do you have any recommendation for individuals, male or female, that are going through something traumatic in their life? What are some things that they can do to kind of help get through that experience and come out on the other side where they are, empowered and stronger because of it?
Yes, I would definitely say to anybody going through something painful that it's really important to find at least one safe person to walk through that with. And the reason for that, or at least the way that I look at it, is that in our isolation, we're more vulnerable to hearing the wrong story about
Sure.
ourselves. So shame, guilt, depression, anxiety, they're liars. They just tell us a distorted story about who we are. And while it's normal to have regret about things in our life, believing that the things that we've survived, endured, things that have been done to us define us somehow. When we do that, again, it distorts the way that we feel about ourselves and the way we see the world. And so having safe people in our life, whether that's a therapist, a mentor, family, friends, just having safe people in our life who can remind us who we really are, and kind of challenge the distortions or the broken beliefs that we have about ourselves or our pain. It's just really important. So, I mean, I could come up with a list of probably 25 things that I would tell somebody, if you're suffering,
Well, I have to imagine,
here are things to do. But,
social media, love it or hate it, one of the things that I think that is good about it is for someone that's going through something, they're not alone.
Right.
There's got to be at least one other person on this planet
Right.
that is also going through
Right.
something very similar, or who
Right.
has gone through it, if not probably hundreds of thousands of
Right.
people. So those communities, you can find them and probably find individuals that are
Right.
trusting to be able to talk to. When you're doing these storytelling sessions with people, have you noticed a group forming or a community forming kind of around that of these women being able to connect, even though they may have gone through something completely different? It still sounds like it was a traumatic experience regardless. So have you noticed them kind of coming together at all and forming a bond?
I would say that the women that I have photographed have not connected with one another, to my knowledge. But I will say that the part of what has been healing for all of them is finding that community somewhere, right? So whether that's, again, within a family system or faith community, or just friends that they've had, since childhood, it is finding people who that you're accepted and received within and known by. And I personally just don't think healing can happen in isolation, without it. That we just need our people, whoever they are, we need our people.
Yeah, I mean, human beings were meant to be in groups and relationships. And I think that, people who live longer, have one of the main common traits that they have is a very strong social connection with some sort of community.
Right.
And living in isolation or just being by yourself on an island is not healthy.
We all saw Tom Hanks deteriorate.
Yeah, right?
But that's true. I mean, the data really is emerging about how community and our social relationships are more important than diet and exercise and sleep and all these other obviously important, they're valuable components to health, but that our relationships with others determine it more than anything else.
Absolutely. So you're running basically three successful businesses now.
Well, I'd say two,
and
then a hobby. Yes,
okay.
Or two and a passion project. Yeah.
So to kind of shift gears a little bit, then, I mean, that's the definition of a serial entrepreneur. So what recommendations do you have for, I would say specifically women who are looking to start their own business, regardless of what field it's in, that maybe you've learned over the years by, running two successful companies and having a really strong passion project?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think that what I wish I would have known earlier, at least, is that, and I think this would be true for many different types of businesses, but specifically those as well where you're creating something artistic, is just recognizing that your work will not be for everyone, right? And that's a really good thing.
Absolutely.
It's healthy to have the diversity that we have. But
well, I would argue the more niche your product, the more successful you'll be. If you try to create something that's going to placate to the masses, it's just going to be this vanilla
Right.
that nobody's really going to care about.
Right.
If
But
you're-
I see so many, I mean, I'm sure
Of
you
course.
do too, so many
Absolutely.
people doing that. Yeah. So just kind of embracing the fact that your work will not be for everyone, and that there will inevitably be people, clients, who are disappointed or don't get it, and they're just not your people. They're not your clients. And so, accepting that your job is not to please or create something that's pleasing to the masses, but really it's to tap into what makes you feel most alive. And I see understanding more often that, obviously hustling and work are part of, owning your own business, but I don't see a lot of health practice with boundaries and time management. And so, to anybody, especially women, starting a business, I would definitely say, figure out what makes you feel alive, recognize you're not going to please everybody, and that's good.
Yeah.
Like, that's a healthy thing. And to just take care of you in the process, have boundaries, say no, practice some radical acceptance.
People have a really hard
Yeah.
time saying no.
They do.
Yeah. So I think that's really key in any business, is saying no to the things that you don't want to do, because you won't give it your all if you don't
Right.
want to do it.
Right. Truly.
So any parting words of wisdom for our audience, anything that you'd like to put out in the world?
I guess I would just affirm that, anybody listening to this, that your story matters. Like, it's purposeful. You're supposed to be here on this planet, and that anything you're going through, whether it's a season of celebration or a season of great pain, is part of a beautiful story.
Well, it's life. I mean,
yes,
life
it
is
is.
sandwiched between, terrible events that happen to you and amazing events that happen to you. And I think that you come to appreciate the amazing things that happen to you because of the tragedies. It gives you a different perspective, helps kind of create who you are, and makes you appreciate the good times.
Definitely can. So, yeah, just affirming that people's stories matter, and that they, people belong. We
Yep.
belong to each other. We belong here, and the world is better for it. That diversity.
Well, I think in the climate that we find ourselves in, with we have more tribalism than we've ever seen, and people are very quick to back into their corners and put up walls and fences around themselves. I think that you're working hard to kind of break down those barriers and be a voice for people who wouldn't otherwise have a voice or platform. And it's super awesome to watch.
Thanks, Danny.
So if people want to find and follow you, can you one more time kind of give us
Yes,
those?
yeah. So melbosna.com or Mel Bosna Storyteller on Instagram. And those would be the easiest ways to see the stories and to shoot me an email or inquiry.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect. Well, I highly recommend that you follow her and reach out to her if you want to get your own story out there. Mel is an amazing individual, and I appreciate you being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me,
All right.
Danny.
Thanks a lot, and we will see you guys next time.